Today about education and leadership. We've spent several days as a team talking about leadership and education and coming up with a point of view of what we believe leadership and education should look like. And I want to spend just a couple of minutes before I open up for discussion and dialogue with my group members to talk about some of the principles that we've identified over the last several days. So when we take the concept of leadership, which we spent some time trying to focus on, when we look at what is leadership, we take the view that we're trying to allow people to flourish themselves and also to create an environment within which other people flourish. So what we're focusing on in the leadership paradigm is to provide opportunities for others to make sense of meaning, inspiration, hope, motivation, and empowerment. So that led us to a bigger question of how do we educate people to ultimately become leaders that can have a positive influence in the world around them. So we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what we mean by education and what the purpose of education is. And we came up with what I think is a very simple definition, but it's layered with multiple layers of meaning. At the end of the day, when we educate people, we're trying to prepare people to flourish in life. I think it's a really simple concept that brings together so much in a very rich and powerful way. But then the question becomes, so what is flourishing? What do we mean by flourishing? So we spent quite a bit of time as a group trying to come up with a sense of what that means as well. And we felt that it really depends on many of the assumptions that you have about your own reality and what life is, that will be driven by your worldview as to what you personally believe flourishing is and what it should look like. So we came up with some basic aspects of flourishing to try and bring a definition into play. And we thought, at a minimum, we need to be able to sort of thrive within and relate to the systems around us. We need to have access to our true nature and inner knowing. We need to become free to understand, to choose our own worldview, not one that's imposed upon us by other people. And we need to be capable of healing, managing health, and taking responsibility. We then talked about leadership education for the 21st century. And we spent a lot of time talking about where we've come from and where we're going to. So, and you'll hear from the panelists in just a minute, but at the heart of what we were saying, we do believe that much of education needs to change, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And things like, where are we changing from and to? Much of what we teach and how we approach education can be seen as quite linear, so we felt we needed to take more of a systems view. We know that there's a huge emphasis on technical skills, on grades, on really specific narrow domains of knowledge, and we felt that we need to take a broader view and look at the whole person and the functioning of the whole person. We know that a lot of the way we are taught is to look at problems of the past, but importantly as educators, we need to prepare people for the future. We know that we have a tremendous focus on materialism, but we also believe that we need to look towards spiritual existence. We need to move from theoretical learning toward a lot more experience and practice. And we need to teach people how, not just how to master knowledge, which I think we all agree schools do quite well, but also to look at how we facilitate living well together and flourishing. So with that set up as our preface, I want to start the dialogue with my panel members. And the big question that we have all spoken about to try and grapple with is how on earth then do we best prepare our students for the uncertainties of the future? So I'll start with you, Adrian, please.
Hi. So my background is I'm deputy head of a secondary school, so 11 years old to 18 years old. So that's the area that we're working with. In terms of how we try and best prepare our students for their future world, how we try and make them flourish, how we try and optimize their highest potential is by a bespoke educational system that is still based on high academic achievement. We recognize that our students still need to have the good grades to get into universities and to go on and do really good things. They have to have the knowledge. We also have, I'm the deputy head of the co-curricular, which means art, music, drama, sport, and something called service, which I'll come to in a second, where we really want to think that it's not just about the academics. We're really interested in holistic education and what they learn outside of the classroom is just as important as what they're learning inside of the classroom. And I would argue from my perspective, because I'm coming from the co-curricular perspective, this is more important than what they learn in terms of their leadership skills, their confidence, their collaboration, their creativity, their empathy, their emotional intelligence that they get from those experiences outside of the classroom where they're working together with others on a goal. We also have our third strand would be our pastoral system, which deals with well-being, where we really want to try and make sure that our students are happy. They're happy, they're healthy, they're not stressed out. And this brings in some of perhaps the spiritual side of things that we could be looking at, especially what I'm going to try and take away from this conference. And then lastly, our fourth pillar is our service education. Keeping in tune with the theme of this conference and the common destiny for humanity and oneness and I to we and you and I and you and everything. This is where we really, for us, it's our service program where we instill within our students the absolute need for them to contribute to society. So to not just be individuals, separate from society, but that are a functioning part of society. That interconnectedness, that we are a highly selective independent school in England. So a lot of our students come from very wealthy and privileged backgrounds, and we spend a lot of time with them as moral educators, talking about character and virtue and what they should be doing to give back to society, especially from a position of privilege. And we think that's our role as educators, and that is the purpose of education, is to not just focus inwards. So it sounds almost contrary to some of the things we're talking about here with developing self-awareness, but we think we develop that self-awareness through a program where they have to look outwards towards others and realize that we have all those problems that Deepak Chopra was just talking about. Even though we are a social construct as a school, we have to work within that framework, and we like to think of it as an ethical framework, in that we will try and address climate change and socioeconomic problems and populism, tribalism, all of these things through critical dialogue with our students. We're an international baccalaureate school, which means that, and there's a heavy mission statement from the IB in that we want our students to leave as creative change agents that are going to make a more caring and compassionate world after they leave. They're going to be the future leaders of the world that are equipped with the skills to be able to do that. And so I think I'll stop talking there now in terms of that's what we're trying to do. And we're trying to have a framework where we practice things. Like I don't know if any of the philosophers from this morning's panel are here right now, but I really loved a lot of what I heard this morning and thought, actually we're kind of doing that in terms of practicing kindness. Our students they know they have to be kind. And that whole idea of practicing morality, we do that within our school in terms of our framework, in terms of a practice. Then I think, we've had a lot of discussions over the last 3 days of the chicken-egg discussion. What happens is, does the thought come first that leads to the action, or can you have a framework where you have a specific action that then, and a framework that then can lead to higher consciousness or a better way of being? And we're trying to do that as educators within our school to make sure that our students, we do make them reflect on their experiences, and that they will learn so much from the structure we put in front of them to be better people at the end of it. Sorry, I went on so long, I'll stop.
I think the aspects I'd like to emphasize in this context of an education that's centered around flourishing, and not just flourishing of the individual, but flourishing of the individual in a sense of full consciousness, enabling others to flourish, to not promote tribalism, to do it in a context that it's not just about humankind, but humankind in the context of non-humans, of a sustainable world. I think in that context, I think one of the things we need to think about education in a lifelong continuum, truly lifelong, that it starts very, very early, from zero to pre-kindergarten, in terms of setting the context. And I think that has implications in terms of the role of not just the educator, but the role of the parent and the family and instilling a view of what is education in this new context. As Adrian, it progresses through primary and secondary school. But then as our children develop into more independent, even within a context, and they are now making decisions about their own worldview, it needs to then be further shaped as we move into university. But not just in university, because what we're seeing with the pace of change in technology is what you're seeing is that the needs of society are in fact changing rapidly. That even with the sense of consciousness, there's still the need for new knowledge and skills and capabilities will continue to grow throughout your lifetime. It will therefore then the need to have continuous education, still based in consciousness, but that also happens throughout the lifetime. So I think it's in this notion of lifelong learning that will be incredibly important. Two, I think that as we've talked about, and one of the things we've experienced as some of the English speakers from the Western world, is that the pathways, in fact, will be different. No surprise, East versus West. And that some of the frameworks that we will embrace in the West will have to evolve to be a more holistic framework, which is, in fact, different than I think the starting point of the worldview that is often very, very typical in the East. And I think that's a very different. I think lastly, as we think about education, I think, again, being very practical, I do think the challenge will be how do, in fact, do we navigate from, if you will, an outdated education model and actually map practical pathways to a new educational model. So it's this notion of in parallel and prototypes, and how do we actually have people experience a new motivation, a new educational system, I think will be very important as we think about an education consistent with this notion of flourishing.
So I would like to build a little on what was said so far. Professor DeRoque framed the goal for education to be flourishing, this notion of living fully, living life to the fullest, living well, not just surviving, not just making money, but having purpose in life and experiencing life in a fully rewarding sense. And my other co-panelists have talked about the importance of addressing some of the global challenges that we all face, social and global and environmental and health challenges. I would like to suggest that education needs to do a better job with bringing bringing out two skills for students. These are creativity and collaboration. Students need to have a higher level of creativity and a higher ability to collaborate when they come out of their educational programs. And they also need a greater degree of resilience. I don't know how the word resilience translates into Chinese, but it's this ability to bounce back from difficult situations. And the kind of education that we see in most educational institutions does not do a very good job with raising the level of skills in these two areas. So we have, again, as was said earlier, we have an emphasis on technical skills, the contents, math, the sciences, the humanities, and then when you get into business, you learn about business strategy, you learn about finance, you learn about operations research, about supply chain management, but none of these skills, and I should say that, I think this was touched on also, we are starting to teach morality, or try to responsibilize students with a greater understanding of emotional intelligence, ethics, and social intelligence. But what is missing? And what is this Act One conference really about? It's about allowing human beings to develop intuitive skills, a greater inner awareness that allows them to be a more complete human being, a more connected human being, a human being that is more profoundly in touch with their life purpose and is also more deeply connected to other people around them, other students, the community that they live in, and also more deeply connected to nature. Because only when we educate students and educate people to be so deeply connected to self, others, and nature, will we see future leaders who will not only want to create wealth, but also serve humankind. Because when you are connected to yourself, others, and the world, then you want to take care of community, you want to take care of the next generation, you want to take care of the world around you. So the question that I think @ONE has been even embodying is, how do you get that kind of direct intuitive skills? How do you get that kind of consciousness of connectedness? And it comes through practices, mindfulness practices, practices like cultivating stillness and meditation and Qigong and Tai Chi and other ways to be more aligned with the energies that allow you to feel whole and balanced as a human being. So it's in this area that education needs to spend more time. It's developing direct intuitive skills that come from mindfulness type practices to allow people to change who they are and be more aware of how they impact others and the world around them.
I want to switch gears just a little bit. Over the course of several days, we've talked a lot about how young people are becoming more individualistic and how many of them stand outside of the system or want to fight the system or don't see themselves as being part of a system. And yet on the other hand, we know that to flourish, you need to understand what system you're in, the multiple systems that you're in, and how do you function within the different systems, for example, the family system or society at large or the world around us. So I want to pick that up as a question for my panelists. You know, how do we take these young people who have been trained to be incredibly individualistic and lead them to believe that they're part of a system to which they can contribute? I know you can answer this, Adrian, so I'll start with you. Thank you.
Well, and again, we specifically think about this all the time, and I totally agree with what Chris was saying, is I think we do need to spend more time, and one of the reasons why we're here, and I have a colleague in the audience who's the director of our Institute of Teaching and Learning, and another two colleagues are arriving today because we want to learn, perhaps from these more, how we can teach or set up a structure where we can have this intuitive knowledge, but and be more aligned with nature within the school context in terms of our particular school context, and I'd love to hear more about it later as well. But in terms of how we get them away from being so individualistic and individualized, and our students are like most teenagers, they're on social media all the time, and it is the me generation, and what we do very specifically and prescriptively is, what I alluded to a little bit earlier was our service program. So we have an Institute of Service and Social Impact that is prescriptively teaching them how they can be better social change agents, how they inculcate social responsibility, and making them aware again that they are part of the bigger whole, that they are not individuals, that everything that they do has an impact on other people. And so we have many different programs where our students engage in throughout the week, where they go into old folks' homes and they read poetry to old people. They go work with old people and do art, make art with them, ceramics. They go into disabled schools and help with the younger children. They go and help disabled children ride horses, and where they are actively giving to somebody else and not thinking individually at all, not thinking about it, and then they have to critically reflect on that. And we think it has a big effect on them in terms of, and what we're really trying to do is work on something, an Aristotelian term called habituation, where they come to Sevenoaks and they don't think of it as time where they think, oh, we've got to do our service element now and go and do good to society. But we're trying to inculcate this idea within them that that's just part of what we do. That's part of being a good human being. We want them to leave as better human beings, but just being part of parcel of what they do, because it becomes a habit. This kindness and giving to others becomes a habit that obviously has an impact on society. The old people in the old folks' homes, they love it when we come there. and the students get a warm, fuzzy feeling about it as well, but we're hoping it becomes part of their DNA. But then afterwards, they just realize that, yeah, that's just normal, that what we do is think about others all the time, and we don't just think about ourselves. It's not about me. And we challenge our students. A lot of times, some of the students that go into, we have to work with some of these charitable organizations, it's uncomfortable. And we push them out of their comfort zones in order to make them realize that there are people out there that have specific needs, and our students are in a position where they could and should help other people. And so we're really trying to develop this in our students, and again, so coming back to the title of it is that, you know, it's an institute of service, servicing others, and social impact. And if schools aren't having a social impact, and I'm not sure what they think the role of education is. So that's how we're trying to take them out of their individualized way of thinking.
Crystal, Jumper Leagues and Counter-Target? I've been watching your face.
Well, I really think what was just said in terms of the importance of giving students experience of being in service to others is so important. You know, the kind of skills that we're talking about and changing consciousness so that people feel more connected to others in the world around them doesn't happen conceptually. You're not going to teach people technical skills for being more responsible to others. What you need to do is you need to give people an experience of what it's like to be deeply connected to others. And I think that's what you were describing. That's what this approach, this experience that you're giving your students is all about. And we need to see more in our schools. We need to see more efforts of not just having people be in service to others, but all experiences that allow them to feel connected to who they are and connected to nature. Think of how many of you have students, for example, or how many of you don't get a chance really to be out in nature very much. You know, when you live in a big city, it's difficult to actually be in a context where you can be with trees and flowers and, you know, all the other parts of nature. And it's profoundly disconnecting for us to live in a world where many of the children we educate are all the time jumping from one task to another, you know, this multitasking that we're asking our students to do, often on electronic screens, often inside, and with social media, which recently has been shown to actually be very disconnecting. You know, you think social media connects people, but it actually disconnects the human being. So just to say that I think that these are all elements which I would agree are fundamental to a new kind of education where we give people not just technical, emotional skills, but also what are fundamentally experiential, spiritual, intuitive skills.
I'll just build on what both of my colleagues here have said. In that you can think about this abstractly, conceptually, but the notion of being experiential, I think, is quite important. And if we think about our education system at scale, it's the realization that there are many schools in the communities that offer tremendous opportunities to truly experience collaboration, compassion, engagement on issues that are fundamental to the students and parents within those communities. We're talking about communities that in some cases are impoverished. They're remote and rural areas. They have real needs in their local, either related to nature, related to the lack of economic opportunity. And so I think in some ways, you can imagine this notion of caring, of collaboration, of seeing a whole that's much better than one's own ego. In some ways, maybe more relevant than even some of the near-term technical and knowledge skills in terms of their ability to relate to. And so how do we in fact have an educational model that leverages the actual environment that our schools are in, leverages the experiences that they're having within their families to teach caring, so it's not abstract. It's not so far in the future that, again, as young people, they have a tendency to want near-term. That's the notion of the handheld device. It's near-term interaction, near-term access to information, entertainment. And so how do we actually bring the relevancy of some of the very attributes that we're trying to develop with our children? How do we make them salient in much more the near term? And I do think it's by engaging in the actual local communities, with the schools, and where they're collaborating each and every day.
If I can just add one thing here, one thing that I find really promising is a lot of people are recognizing this now, this need as well. It's not like, you know, Seven Oaks School, we like to think we're on the cutting edge of progressive education, but we're talking to a lot of different people, and one can look at places like the Harvard Educational School that have a publication called Turning the Tides, and something which they call Making Caring Common. And they recognize today, you know, this is Harvard Education School, and they don't just want the students with the best grades anymore. So this is happening in Western cultures now, you know, everyone's getting top grades now. It's very difficult to differentiate, to distinguish between the best students. And people are starting to realize, even at the very high end, we're talking Harvard, that what they want is students that are going to be good people, that care, that are compassionate, that can collaborate and be creative, as my colleagues have said. In England, there's the University of Birmingham has the Jubilee Center for Character and Virtue Education, and it's now becoming much more into the normal dialogue, and schools are going to have to listen to that. Educators are going to have to realize if they want their son to get into Harvard or into some of these really top universities, they've got to prove they're good people, that they're doing something socially responsible in their societies, and not as a box-ticking exercise, but that they can truly show that they've got some sort of level of social responsibility. And I think that, again, just coming back to your original question, that's what's going to stop them from just thinking about themselves, is that they, you know, even if they have to do it, if they're compelled to, I still think it's going to take them outside of themselves.
I want to pick up on a couple of things that have been talked about in the last round of questions. One thing that we've talked about a lot during our discussion is with privilege comes responsibility, and most of us on the stage, we represent brands that are really expensive colleges to get into, and we know that people need a lot of income to come to our institutions. And then also, Adrian, you mentioned about not just checking the box. So one of the things we talked about was, you know, okay, so I go and organise a blood drive or a bake sale, so then I just check the box and I can say, good job, I've done my bit now, I've helped society, I can move on to the next thing. Or another thing that came up in our earlier discussions, if we send our students out to try and solve the problem of homelessness, that's a big ambitious goal there, how do they know what to pay attention to? So if I can pick up on these threads of ideas that have come through over the last couple of days, how do we really make sure that this is ingrained into students, that this is something deep and meaningful to them, and they're not just acting out of privilege to want to make the world a better place through their eyes and on their terms, that they're actually meeting the needs of society at large. So if I start with Adrian, please.
It's something that we really think about in terms of, and what a lot of independent schools in England do is they'll what we call neo-colonial charity or philanthropy, where they'll fly out to an impoverished part of the world, put in a water pump and paint a wall of a school and say, oh, didn't we just do something fantastic for those poor people, and then they fly back home. We call poverty tourism. So we very much don't do that. And our director of our Institute of Service and Social Impact works with all the students ahead of time whenever they do engage in a project. And the students have to research it themselves. They have to start with why. What is the issue? What's the problem? And they've researched the socio-historical, political, cultural context from which we're working in. Is sometimes, if we went into a different country to help out, which of course we should be doing, but is it going to have a negative impact on them in terms of sustainability? If it's just a one-off donation or something, is that then not going to actually help them in 10 years' time? And we also don't want to be coming from a patronizing position. We want to be coming, we look at it as we're fraternizing. It's a fraternity of people and common goals. And that our students, and this is where it's perhaps selfish from my part, with our students, I want them to learn that they are going out there and they're going to learn just as much from that experience about whether we're in Ghana or Cambodia or Rajasthan, wherever we are in the world, that our students are going to get something really positive out of it, because they've done so much of the research. And they have to do a research proposal before they do any of these projects, where they start with the why, they research, they have to take a box about, is this empowering the voice of the people who we're going to help or that we're going to work with, together with? Is it going to have a long-standing impact? What are the next steps? And in this sense, we think this is very much embedding the whole experience into them with that. And going back to your point, those are trips, and it's something that we don't like bake sales. We do them, but we don't like just bake sales. They earn a lot of money and they give the money away and they don't even know. I used the example in our panel discussion about, we have something called the Big Sleep Out, and where our students go and they sleep outside for one night. They replicate what it's like to be homeless, but they're sleeping on the school campus, being observed, supervised by teachers. So but it's cold and it's uncomfortable, and they get wet and tired, and they basically don't sleep all night. But we've now said you can't do that unless you've actually spoken to a homeless person, unless you know what it's really like to be homeless, or else what really are you doing? Yeah, you may be earning, they have to get sponsored, so they get lots of money that we can give to a homeless shelter, but is there something educational, is there something transformative that happened within that process? Probably not, just by sleep, at 8 o'clock in the morning, they go in for a nice hot meal and go and have a shower in the dorm room. So we're really trying to position the students in terms of, we're talking about the lifelong learning and student-centered learning, we're trying to position them that they really get an impacting educational experience through serving others as well. I don't know if that answers your question.
I'll come at it slightly differently, because again, having overseen an education system across the country, I think there's another opportunity to make this very salient. And this notion is, unfortunately, you have many, in fact, too many students who in the course of their family and their community lives experience trauma, experience significant trauma. And so if you think about this notion of healing and self-healing and awareness and consciousness as a real means to deal with trauma, that becomes a fertile area for enlightenment that can be applied across a broader continuum to kind of truly knowing oneself. And I think in that context, it really is, again, a basis that you can kind of build upon. And so I think all too often, as we said, I think the solutions or the approaches, as we think about the more affluent areas, will be one set of challenges. But I think we have a very different set of challenges when things are much less affluent, when we don't have all the resources. We have much more near-term challenges, economic challenges, safety challenges, things that can make you very materialistic, right? They reinforce the materialism. How do you actually address those? And I think this notion of health and emotional well-being is a very important aspect, is a way to reach and engage these students.
I'm grateful that you reminded us of that, because part of what we'll talk about in a minute is giving younger people the skills to cope with things that are happening in their world that they're not always equipped to deal with. And I'll come back to that just so I'll just let Chris speak.
So I think it's very interesting to hear this dialogue, because on the one hand, we want to give children and students, we want to give them the opportunity to have these experiences of caring for others, caring for society. On the other hand, we're not always aware of the context. I think that's Tony's point. They may have trauma, they may have, but there's another important context in there. It's not just the social context or community context, it's also the context of the individual. You can have two very different individuals, two students, okay? Both of them are going to work with homeless people. One of them is someone who practices inner stillness, practices developing a mindfulness state of being, and is caring in their life to develop a greater sense of purpose, flexibility in behaviors, has experiences in their life that are leading them to be a more mature human being. The other student, same age, might come from a home, let's say, where it's not possible to do those things, and is therefore going through the same motions of caring for homelessness people, but is with a brain that is jumping from one thing to the next, you know, unable to concentrate, all the time multitasking and feeling profoundly disconnected from their own self, and not able to relate well to other people, poor relational skills, and also, you know, in an environment that doesn't have much nature in it. So this is all to say we have to understand this kind of context. I think that was what Tony was getting at. But the answer to that is that we would be better served to help every student to have the kind of attention to inner well-being, to spiritual skills, to being more, to have more practices in their life that allow them to be centered. And incidentally, you know, we are here Westerners, but it's very clear to us that China has a particularly rich tradition in this. And that in the Chinese culture, whether it's in Taoism or Confucianism or Zen Buddhism, there is a rich tradition of paying attention to the inner self and of approaching the great truths in life through direct experience. That's something that we need to bring more into education around the world.
Direct to Tony. So in part of our conversation this afternoon, we started talking about, you know, from a position of privileged children, and then we reminded ourselves that there are, you know, multiple different challenges that children with socioeconomic circumstances face, or even allegedly equivalent circumstances face. And then the other part, as I build my question, as we were talking over the last couple of days, we had a colleague who represented 0 to 3-year-olds, and we had, you know, you're representing sort of 11 through 18-year-olds, and then Tony, you pick up the baton, and Chris, and you pick up the 18s through graduate school, and I'm graduate only. So what do we do if we're getting children or young adults sent to us at different stages of their learning and their career? How do we work with them, and how do we advantage of what they're trying to do as part of their own journey? Tony?
Yeah, I think this is I'd say it's one of the perennial challenges in education, even in today's educational system, which is the discontinuity oftentimes that exists from 0 to 3 all the way through post-secondary education and graduate school education. I think, candidly, it starts with where this conversation began. I think it needs to start with a raising of an awareness of what is the purpose and role of education. We agree that there's some unifying, understanding that education itself is not just meant to be a means to an end in a very materialistic context. Then once you have that grounding, then you have a frame of a context that spans across that I think is incredibly important. And that without that, I think it will be very hard to bring more coordination across the continuum. I think the other key aspect, and I think is also incredibly important, because education and the values goals are so influenced by parents and the family, right? Not just early on who have direct responsibility, but also in terms of expectations all the way through university. That really engaging of the parents and the family to that they subscribe to the role of education and do it holistically, I think is incredibly important if you're going to do it. Then I think it's got to be through a collaboration with the educators in the system. Because I think that's a challenge of the professional developments in the context that many educators bring that needs to be reinforced. But again, I do think, you know, to your point, Jenny, if you think about, even if this is the model, to transition to that in state, we're going to need interventions that are going to be different in a graduate school environment, different than a secondary school environment, different than what you're going to need in a pre-K environment, where you could argue there's less constraints. You're starting in much more of a greenfield environment. And so in some ways, you could say it's incredibly important if we're going to get there over the course of a generation that we have a lot of emphasis on 0 to K if you really are going to set the context for the future.
I just going to add to what Tony was saying about parents, and it's one of the things we really have to do at Seven Oaks, and I think maybe we could even be doing better at, but we constantly are in dialogue with our parents. We have so we're in a fortunate position that our International Baccalaureate academic scores are so high that that's just a given at our school, that we can create our own curriculum. Especially for the middle school, that is quite progressive, and it is based on a lot of these experiential skills, critical reflection, collaboration, project-based learning, empathy, emotional intelligence. But we have to communicate, and we have certain, in terms of well-being and pastoral issues, we don't have homework, we don't do internal exams, and if you compare us to other independent schools in the UK, nobody else is doing that, and parents often question us about that, and they say, well, I'm spending lots of money to send my son or daughter to your school because we want them to get into Oxford and Cambridge. And we have to tell them, trust us. And we have this dialogue with parents. We have a lot of parents' evenings where we explain the new system, where we say this is what we're doing, and this is why we're doing it. And I think there needs to just be much more communication with educators about the need for developing these skills. And just a second point you made there too about the educators. Our teachers, many of our teachers, I'd say most of them, over half of them, have MAs or PhDs at a secondary school level, which is often the case in independent schools in the UK. But they're also, they've got high standards of the academic side, the cerebral side, and many of our staff, they probably question why me and my colleagues are here right now and thinking, what is all this stuff? No, they just need to be studying more. Why don't they have internal exams? And we have to constantly communicate to them our mission, our values, our principles, and why we're doing it. And I think as Westerners and coming from this traditional classical education where there's a certain model, it's really hard even for us to do it. And I think we all need to get together to collaborate more to say, let's just agree that this is the better way to go, and including things that you're saying, let's think about more about that intuitive knowledge and all these sorts of things. So we're probably really behind you guys in China in a lot of these ways, and hence why we're here, to see what we can learn.
I want to ask a follow-up question. So we're all educators here, and many of your parents, we're parents, and we struggle with the choices that we make on behalf of our children in terms of where to send them to school. And some of us have more influence over that than others, depending on the structure of the family. But so my question is, when we look at, so I speak as a mother now, having put my children through college, and I worried a lot. I worried about the cost of education. I worried about what they would do when they graduated. I worried about the grades while they went through college. And at the end of the day, we're saying that the purpose of education is to prepare someone to flourish for life. So how do we help parents make a decision about choosing education when our society is set up around grade point average, return on investment, jobs at the other end? Chris, you're leaning in, do you want to start? Or Andrea, okay. Please.
Again, kind of reiterating to my previous point about that we have to constantly talk to them about that and say, and I know some of our parents don't. They are paying money to get their kids into Oxford or Cambridge or Yale or Harvard, and we have to constantly just talk to them about our philosophy of education, and that it is going to be better. And it's really hard to tell a parent and a lot of our parents are doctors, lawyers, CEOs of companies who got to their position because they did really well at school and they studied really hard and they did all those things that classical traditional education did. So to try and tell them, the pitch that I just told you about Harvard and making caring common, and that universities now are looking for better people, I have to constantly have this dialogue with parents, and it's kind of bringing them along the way, but where we have to say, I think the good thing is, and I'm a parent as well, and for any parent in the room, the most important thing in your life is your child. Or your children, and so one way that I find it easy to tap into them is say your child's also going to be happier. They're going to be more resilient. They're going to be happier. They're going to be a better person for other people. But also, come to our school. Don't put them through another independent school that's just whip them the whole time, and they might get even better grades. But the grades aren't the be-all and end-all. And yeah, we really talk, we're in constant dialogue talking about, we're trying to create a whole person here, that then I do tell them, I say, the irony is, by us not having internal exams, by us not making the child work from morning till night, and making them all do sport, making them get engaged in the co-curricular program rather than just in prep, is that the irony is that that's going to get them a better job, and especially because they're learning those experiential skills that Chris was talking about earlier, that many CEOs feel that they're not getting in the business world, where a student might have straight A's, highest grade point average, but doesn't know how to talk to somebody, doesn't know how to work with somebody, doesn't know how to be on a team, doesn't have any empathy or emotional intelligence. And I think more people, the business world, I think, really is driving this, and this is the conversation I have with parents to say, again, but having to say, trust us, we know, and we're really lucky that we're in a position where when we have these questions on interview days or when they come for visits and we say, you know, this might not be the school for you, it might not be the school for your child, if you're not comfortable with that. And we find that most of our parents, once they've heard us talk about how much we value the individual student and what we're trying to do with them, well, the ones that decide to come, they say, okay, that is a really good thing to do.
Before I pass it to Tony, remember that everybody gets good grades, and I think that's a really important point. Tony.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, one, I think it would be easier when there are more models out there, when there's more pedagogical models, that you can say, here's an example, right? People you can point to, here's an example where you truly have a more holistic educational model, and students have flourished. They still got an Oxford, right? Oxford or Cambridge, or Harvard or Yale, right? And they did so because they were well-rounded. And they're more likely to be successful and thrive in a holistic context. Not just that they're going to get good grades, but they're going to and get a good job, but they're going to truly be happier in their life. They're truly going to lead. We talk about leadership. They're going to lead in an ethical, responsible, sustainable way. They're going to create an environment where others can flourish. I think as we have more models, it will be reinforced. Because I think many parents, it's less that they don't want that for their child. They don't want that necessarily at the expense. And so they see in some ways a trade-off. That if I, in fact, I know we're going to talk about, if I, in fact, you're spending more time, right, on these kinds of character, consciousness, is that going to detract from the traditional academic studies? And I think as our pedagogical models evolve, and where that's less seen as it's a zero sum, I think that'll be quite important. I guess I think the other thing, which would be important, I do think that everyone would benefit from a deeper appreciation of humankind and where we are in the context of our world. I know there's a lot of discussion about it in this context, but the notion of, and I know Chris has talked about, the impact on the decimation of species. When we talk about climate control, I think the sense of urgency that we all need to have, I still think it's still not in the consciousness of most across. And I think in many parents, I still don't think it's in their consciousness top of mind. I think that's an important aspect of mobilizing a sense of urgency around some of these decisions that make them better appreciate. We do think there's a trade-off. Perhaps those trade-offs are different.
Well, I want to finish my comments with a few, I think, very encouraging thoughts. These new models of education are coming, and they are coming around the world because they are driven by market realities, and also by, as Tony was just alluding to, the fact that the world, the earth is really in a bad situation. Our social fabric and the environment is calling for urgent solutions. What do I mean by market solutions pushing these kind of educational models? First of all, it's clear now that firms, companies, businesses that spend more attention on sustainability and flourishing do better financially than firms that don't. Secondly, it's clear that employees who work for companies that have a greater purpose are more engaged, have greater satisfaction, greater creativity, are more likely to contribute to the success of the firm, to be more productive, than employees who don't work for firms that have greater purpose. So I think that these intuitions that you already have, that parents and employers are going to pretty soon understand that teaching students more than just financial, technical skills, paradoxically will allow those students to do even better financially, and also, guess what, be happy human beings. Because isn't that what we want? We want our children, we want people, students who are educated, to not just be successful in material terms, but also to flourish, to go back to that original term, to be able to experience joy in their life, and to be able to share that joy with others in the world around.
And we've got 2 more minutes. I think I just want to do some concluding remarks, and then I'll be off the stage at 3:15. So at the heart of what we're talking about is the notion of a functioning society, a place where people can find purpose and meaning. And that's something that's been drawn us together in much of our conversation. And as educators, we see our role as preparing people to flourish in the society of which we're part. And so as we've gone through our conversation this afternoon, we spent a lot of time, there's a complexity around good and bad education and how do we judge education. But I think if we stay focused on the simple notion of preparing people to flourish in life, then to me, this concept of what is education and what are we trying to do as educators becomes a lot simpler. And so that's one of the great takeaways from the many days we've spent together. And then I think the other part that's really important in the conversations we've had is that we're not just individual human beings, we exist in a system. And to flourish means to also understand how we connect to the system of which we're part. And I know in Chinese culture we spend time learning about families and the importance of families and relationships within families, but I think as Chris and others have reminded, it's not just the family as a system, although that's an important system, but there are many systems of which we're part, and we need to know how to flourish within those systems. I think also the challenges in front of us as educators, if you remember that we're trying to teach people who can flourish and function in these different systems of which they're part, and to provide them with coping skills, whether many people face trauma no matter what type of upbringing you've had, many people live in fear, they're not safe, they're worried about their future. And I think to remind ourselves that we're trying to give people the life skills to allow them to cope. It's not just what their grades are, how well they do in an accounting class, how well they do in a language class. It's more important to us that we develop these lifelong skills that allow people to develop character, to operate with resilience, to practice empathy, be empathetic toward those around them. And also, most importantly, for this to become part of their practice, not a check-the-box activity, but something that's deeply ingrained into them. If we can get them while they're young at 0, that's a good start, but if we can't, we're never too late to do. So on that note, I want to thank you very much, thank my panelists for a great conversation, and thank you for listening, thank you for your attention.